Welcome to Side Notes. I'm here with the Conservative Member of Parliament, Mark Adler. Mark, your father was a survivor of the Holocaust. You were the first ever Member of Parliament to be elected that had a father as a survivor of the Holocaust. I know that you never asked your father any questions, but there was some times when he did share stories, and even your mother would share stories with you. Could you share a little information that was shared with you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, and it's an honor to be with you on Side Notes, and let me commend you for doing this wonderful work, reaching out to a number of policymakers and people of prominence to interview them, because I think it's really important that people hear their stories. What you ask is a very good question, and I have to tell you that my father passed away over 30 years ago now, and he was quite young when he died. And I remember growing up just in this area here, where not too far from here, where my constituency office is. And the area was, I don't know, many people really know this, but Bathurst Manor has had at one time the largest number of Holocaust survivors per capita outside of Israel. So this tended to be an area where Holocaust survivors would come to after the war and live and raise their families. Now, my father came to Canada really nothing. He was the only survivor from his family, came in late 1947. And I remember my dad never spoke really anything about the Holocaust, about the time in the ghetto and the camps. And I remember, seeing the number on his arm, and us kids knew never really to ask any questions about that. We were never told not to ask, but we just sort of knew not to ask. But there were times when my father would, make a comment, and when he would, again, we would never ask for more information, even though we really wanted to know more. We just sort of knew it was a subject that we just could not talk about and should not talk about. And some of the stories I remember my father telling me once, that when he and his family were in the ghetto together, and the Lodge Ghetto, and I remember that he said that my grandfather, my dad's father, found a dead bird on the street, and it was he made a comment that because there was no food or anything in the ghetto, people were starving to death, to make a chicken soup out of the dead bird. And it doesn't seem that funny now, but in that context, my dad told me that everybody just broke out laughing, and it was just such a funny thing. But it just shows how the desperation and the hunger and the despair of everybody in the ghetto at the time. And there was also another time when my father mentioned, like I said, he didn't talk about this very often, and the stories are very few and far between. There was one time when at Liberation, my father was liberated by the American Army, and when the Americans came to the camp, and the Germans had already left, and everybody was racing around. They all wanted to get to the American forces, and because the Americans had food. And so there was one fellow, my father told me, that was lying on the ground, and he was crying and weeping and saying, he wanted to see the American soldiers because he was dying, and he knew he was, and the last thing he wanted to see were the American soldiers. So my father said he picked him up and he carried him over to see a few of the American soldiers, and he looked at the soldiers and he smiled, and then the fellow died in my father's arms. So those are just a couple of the stories that I remember. Like I said, that was pretty much the extent of it. He never really said a word. It was a subject that nobody would approach. We just knew it was a topic that was off limits, and yet, I really wanted to know more. And I've since found out more by going to the Holocaust Museum in Washington and finding out more information, because, as you know, the Germans kept very good records of where people went and moved, and how they moved them throughout Europe, and from ghetto to camp and camp to camp. So I've since found out more information, but as far as the personal stories go, there's really not a whole heck of a lot, and I wish I did know more.
With the Holocaust in mind, one thing I'm very big on is, in order to make sure that situations like that don't happen again, and also in regards to the residential school, the Khmer Rouge, what they did over in Cambodia in regards to the killing field, what happened in Bosnia, what happened over in Sudan, Rwanda. I mean, it seems to keep on repeating itself. I feel that one way that we have to stop is we have to start teaching the youth about what's happened. What kind of programs has the Conservative Party put forth in regards to educating the youth at the school level to teach them all this stuff?
Well, let me say that the question that you raised in the context of the Holocaust, and as far as what happened in Bosnia and Croatia and Serbia and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, all of these incidents occurred after the Holocaust. So you'd think that we hadn't really learned our history as a people, as a human race, and yet I think a lot of progress has been done. The problem is that we tend to repeat the tragedies over and over and over again. There's certainly no shortage of evil people in the world. But this whole sense of globalization, I think, has been a good thing for the planet. We've gotten to know each other, different races, different cultures, different ethnicities, a lot better than we knew each other in the past. And I think that's been a good thing. I mean, Canada is a great example of how people can come together and live in peace and respect each other and recognize that we all have something to contribute and bring something to the table. And, being a Canadian is the proudest thing that I have. And I know every other Canadian feels exactly the same way. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't mean you can't be proud of your culture, your religion, your heritage, and we all should be. But at the end of the day, we really should be proud Canadians first and foremost. And I know we all are. But having said all of that, it's really important that we remember the past. And whenever I speak about the Holocaust, I'm asked to do that a lot as a member of Parliament and as a son of Holocaust survivors. My message to people, and especially young people, is that when we say never again, it shouldn't just be an empty slogan. It should really be a call to action. And as a call to action, I mean that everybody should take it upon themselves to, yes, recognize we have differences, but emphasize more what we have in common, and emphasize more that we are part of a family. And what do family members do when other family members need their help? They come to their aid. They grab them by the hand and they pull them up and they say, and they don't let them let go until they're actually secure on their feet. And that's what I emphasize when I talk to people, especially young kids, like I said. It's so important that we all have differences, but that we are there to respect each other, help each other, give an outstretched hand to all of those. There's a lot of need in our community, and it's so important that people come to the aid of others, because a society is measured on its strength of how we treat the less fortunate in our society. And it's so important that we demonstrate compassion and empathy for others. And as a government, we have tried to do that as much as possible. We tried to remember the past through joining the International Holocaust Remembrance Committee. We're now the world chair of that for this year. We've recognized the contribution of immigrants to our country by making Pier 21, which is the portal where most people came to Canada over the last century, in Halifax, and recognizing our past. So we are proud of where we all come from and proud of what we are as Canadians today is so important. That's something our government really emphasizes, and something that I put a lot of resources into, because I'm a proud Canadian, as I know you are, and as I know every other Canadian is out there. And so it's a wonderful thing to see here in this great country of ours that, and the recent example of the Filipino hurricane, the typhoon, is a great example of how all Canadians just came together to help our fellow Canadian Filipinos help their family members back in the Philippines. What a great example of being a part of a family.
And also we have to remember that the Harper government was the only federal Canadian government ever to offer an apology for the residential schools. And I do hope that in time that policies are put forth into the school level, that they start teaching the children this is what happens. I mean, just as you're talking about, we have to start doing that, because I think the youth are the are our future. In order to have a better nation, you have to teach them about the past.
Absolutely. You know, there's this great commercial on television now, and I don't remember who put it on, but I just saw it recently, where it shows a bunch of pictures of various babies, and it says, you know, what if they're not born with hatred, they're not born with no respect for others. That's taught. You know, hatred is taught, and what we must do is, when our kids are young, teach them to respect one another and teach them to reach out to help one another, because, you know, we're all members of a family. You know, I read once that 99 and 9/10 of 1% humans have in common. Like, we all have the same DNA. It's just that 1/10 of 1% that we have different, and we have to emphasize the much more that we have in common than what we have apart, and we'll be a better society for it.
And also, you were the founder, the president, and CEO of the Economic Club. Originally, you founded it as the Economic Club of Toronto, but now
Yes.
you've changed the name in 2008 to Economic Club of Canada. What were some of the people that you brought in from all over the world?
Well, it's I'm very proud of the Economic Club of first Toronto and then Canada, as you say. And I started it just a little over 10 years ago now. And we have been very lucky, because we have really become Canada's, and I say we, and I've no longer any real association with it. It's been handed off to others who run the organization. But during my time there, we became Canada's podium of record. And if any politician, world leader, business leader had something important to say, they would come to us, and wanting to convey that message to their stakeholders, to the Canadian public at large. And some of the more prominent speakers we had, Arnold Schwarzenegger. When he was governor of California, his office, I remember sitting in my office getting a phone call from the governor's office. It was the chief of staff to Governor Schwarzenegger, asking me if the Economic Club would be willing to host a speech by Governor Schwarzenegger when he was making his visit to Canada. This was in 2007. And so, of course, I said yes immediately. I didn't really care what else we had on that day. I know we could move things around. But that was a wonderful event. We had almost 2,000 people out for that event, and it was really terrific. And we also hosted Senator John McCain in 2008 during the U.S. presidential campaign. That was the first time ever that a U.S. presidential nominee for either Republican or Democrat had given a speech in Canada. So that was history making, and that was broadcast live, I remember, on CNN and Fox and MSNBC, and it received wonderful, terrific media coverage. And I remember that he came up in his plane. There was another plane of U.S. media following with him, and we had to do stadium seating in the room just to accommodate the U.S. media. It was really terrific. And Bill Clinton, of course, we had him come and speak, and he has this reputation of always coming late to events. And fortunate for us, he came an hour early. And even more fortunate for me, I got to babysit him for an hour before the event. So we had this great talk, and very smart man. And I had a really enjoyable time just talking to him about politics and economics and different areas. And, we've had Prime Minister Harper speak with us, and various cabinet ministers and other world leaders and premiers and business leaders. It was really a very satisfying time in my life. And I was really glad that I started the organization, and even more glad that I was able to see it grow and mature into a real live and viable organization. And like I said, since I became Member of Parliament, I don't have anything to do with the operations of it any longer. I was very fortunate to hire excellent staff who are now running the entire organization on their own. And I don't have any influence with it whatsoever any longer, but I'm proud to see it thriving right now.
And prior to you forming the Economic Club, I think you were a director of the Canadian Institute of Technology out of Boston. How did you feel that helped you with the Economic Club and also with gaining further connections within the business world?
Yeah, I was in Boston for a while, and working with the Ontario Ministry of Industry, Trade and Technology in their Boston office. And it was a really fascinating time to be in Boston. There's so many very smart people, and I really enjoyed being there. You can just feel the brain power in that city. And so working with New England businesses and Ontario businesses and trying to foster joint ventures and transfers of technology, I think really equipped me well for my subsequent role in small business when I started the Economic Club. And certainly today, I draw on all of this knowledge that I've accumulated, both at the certainly at the Economic Club, when I was in Boston. Before that, the Canadian Institute of International Affairs, when I was a director of corporate programming. I feel like every step in my life, even though I had no intention of entering politics, even 5 years ago, yet I feel that every step in my life has kind of led me to this role that I'm in right now. And I draw on every ounce of experience and knowledge that I've received over the last number. I've been very fortunate to have all these wonderful experiences to bring to bear right now as a member of Parliament.
And actually, the question I have to ask you, what motivated you to want to run in the riding here in York Centre?
I have lived in York Centre my entire life. When I was first born, for the first 12 years of my life, we lived in the Dufferin and Wilson area, which is York Centre. When I was 12, we moved up to the Bathurst Manor area, Bathurst Shepherd area, which is still York Centre. I've lived in this area my entire life. I didn't feel that in the last, since I became kind of politically conscious, that the MPs in this area had been doing a very good job. First of all, they didn't live in the area. I think that's really important that you live in the area. I've always lived in the area, raising my 2 young kids in the area with my wife, Allison. And I really think you need to be part of the community to be able to represent them adequately, because you're a member of the community too. And when I didn't see my member of Parliament come to my door, election after election after election, when I didn't see my member of Parliament out at community events, when my neighbors would tell me that they would call their member of Parliament for assistance, they wouldn't be responsive, I didn't think that was right. I thought that the member of Parliament worked for the people, and I think it's so important that a member of Parliament not only waits for people to come to them, but actually reaches out to people, because you have a stake in your community. You want to make your community the best possible community it exists. And the only way I think you can do that is if you're a member of that community, you got some skin in the game, you're raising your family in that community, you know your neighbors, and I think that's really important. And that's what I do on a regular basis. I'm constantly out in the community. I'm door knocking all the time. And I tell people the door. I ask them, I say, I'm here, how can I help you? And 9 times out of 10 people will say, well, you know what? Thank you for coming, but I don't have any problem. And I say, well, you must have something, at least a question. And if they still don't, which they usually don't, I just leave them my card. I say, here's my phone number. If there's anything I can ever help you with, it doesn't matter really what it is, because if something I can't help you with, I can certainly direct you in the right direction. And I leave them my card and my phone number, and I say, please, even if you just want to come by and have a coffee with me in the constituency office, I want to get to know you. So this is what I do as a member of Parliament. I think it's really important, not for me just to sort of sit in my office in Ottawa or sit in my constituency office here in Toronto, but actually be out in the community, constantly finding out what's on people's minds, because we both live in the same area, and we need to make it a wonderful, wonderful riding.
And also, you're the co-chair of the Canadian-Russian Parliament Friendship.
Yes.
I know that here in York Centre is actually the very large Russian-speaking population. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. We're very fortunate in York Centre. York Centre is a very ethnocultural riding. We have a number of distinguishing characteristics. York Centre has the largest number of Russian-speaking people of any riding in the country. Now, these aren't just Russians. These are people from countries of the former Soviet Union. So they come from 17 different countries. The largest number of any riding in the country, right here in York Centre. We also have the largest number of Filipinos of any riding in the country. We have the fastest growing Latino population of any riding in the country, the fastest growing Vietnamese population of any riding in the country, and we have the 3rd largest Jewish population of any riding in the country. So we're very ethnocultural. Plus we have representation from every other country around the world. The Russian-speaking community is, I spend a lot of time in that community, because these are people who've come within the last, I'd say, 20 years to Canada. More so in the last, I'd say, 12 years. And they felt very disenfranchised. Nobody paid any attention to them. My background is Polish-Jewish, and so I felt a very close affinity to Russian-speaking people, because many of them are from the same background, same culture as I am. And so from the get-go, at the beginning, when I got involved in the community, I kind of gravitated toward the Russian-speaking people. And, when you go into the buildings, particularly the Bathurst Steeles area where there's mostly Russian-speaking people, and you smell the great smells from the cooking that's going on in the building, and it brings back a lot of memories for me because these are the foods that I grew up on, and I miss them. So being in that community, I really love and look forward to the opportunities to be with the Russian-speaking people because I just feel so close to them, and we have just so much in common, and I just love being with the Russian-speaking community. They're wonderful people.
And you're also the co-chair of the Interfaith Committee.
Yes.
So that's great to see too, because that one thing I feel very strongly is that we have to start finding that compromise within all different people. We can't have hatred anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically out of religion. Because when I was 1988, I was over in Iran, 21, just after my 21st birthday, and I saw the extremism, the religious extremism over there, and I prayed that I would never see the same religious extremism over here. And I do thank people like yourself that are trying to bridge and get everyone together. That's great to see. I just wanted to quickly add that.
Thank you. And we take a lot of pride in the All-Party Interfaith Committee. It's existed on Parliament Hill for a long time, and we do a lot of events around that. We bring together people, religious leaders, lay leaders from various faiths in the greater Ottawa area, and we hold breakfasts and events in Ottawa, and it's usually attended by 150, 200 people. And there's wonderful experiences because everybody gets to share, what we have, what we do different in various religions, but also what we do the same. We realize that there's just one God, and we're all praying to the same God. We may be taking sort of a different route to it, but if you break down the words, they're pretty much all the same too. And it's so wonderful to see that we have all this in common and that we can share these wonderful histories of our religions and again, when we have these exchanges, it's not just talk, because we're talking about what we can do together, what action we can do, not just talk, but how we can actually demonstrate to others out there that, the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians can stand as one. And we're all interested in the same thing. Yeah, we all have this deep belief in faith and in God, but we also want to help others, the less fortunate in our society. And we all come together on that. We all want to do that. We do that. We go out and we deliver Meals on Wheels. We don't ask what their religion is. People in need are people in need. It doesn't matter what you are. And we go out and we help kids. And we go out and we help those who are in poverty and pee at the food bank. And nobody's asking what their religion is because, when people are in need and we're there it's incumbent upon all of us who are able to do something, to actually do something. And that is what we emphasize in our All-Party Interfaith. We've duplicated that here in the Riding of York Centre too. We've gotten together all the religious leaders and lay leaders. We sit them down at a table and we say, okay, let's identify some of the problems in our community. Doesn't matter what the religion is, but because you are a religious leader in that community, you can help us identify where the need is in your community. And then we all swing into action. And we get involved in Meals on Wheels, and we get involved in helping kids at camps and getting food into their stomachs, and so they don't have to eat Kraft dinner every day. We can get in nourishing. We engage the businesses in the area, and we do some wonderful work with some, particularly kids in this area. And it's just, to see the smile on the kids' faces. That's really the best part of it all. We're not doing it because we're seeking headlines. You probably won't even read about this stuff that we do. This is actually the first time we're really talking about it in a kind of media way. But people just want to know they're respected. And you got to realize that dignity is so important to people. They don't want a handout. You give them a boost, and they'll run with it all the way.
And also, you're a member of the committee, the Finance Committee in Ottawa. One question I have to ask you, 2008 was when they had the housing crisis down in the United States and economical meltdown. What safeguards are in Canada or to protect Canada from a situation like that happening? I know a lot of Canadians were living on cheap credit. Sooner or later, the interest rates are going to go up. What safeguards does Ottawa have in place right now to protect us?
Well, that's right. And, interest rates are virtually nil right now. They're very low, and they have nowhere to go but up. So, I would caution anybody who's borrowing on credit to bear in mind that, yes, interest rates are low today, but they will go up eventually. We don't anticipate that happening in the very near future, but they have nowhere to go. The only one direction, that's up. Having said all of that, No, we don't have a bubble like we did in the United States in 2008. The housing market here in Canada is very secure. It's very safe. We have government-backed CMHC loan guarantees and insured by the federal government. We've also lowered the amortization rate from down to 20 years, which has further safeguarded the housing market. And we have undertaken a strong educational through our financial literacy program in Ottawa. We now are looking for a financial literacy leader. We've passed legislation to help people understand their finances and how to budget for the future more effectively. We've increased the CPP by 25%, which is the largest increase in the history of our country, the Guaranteed Income Supplement. We've also put in place the PRPPs, which is the new registered pension plans that the provinces are coming on board with. And so we've realized that people may not have enough to retire on. So we put in added vehicles for people to take advantage of, so they'll have more money in their retirement years. Now, the global market, economy, yeah, it's still fragile. Our economy is still fragile. We're the number one performing economy in the G8. We've created over 1 million net new jobs since the end of the recession in July of 2009. Our economy is doing very well. We've been rated as having the best financial sector, banking sector of any country around the world, the most secure. We were the only country that didn't have any bank failures. We've had a job-driven recovery since 2009, since the end of the recession. Having said all of that, notwithstanding the fact that we're doing very well, we're still fragile. Europe is not out of the woods yet. The American economy is still not out of the woods yet. So a lot depends on how other economies around the world perform. But as far as Canada goes, we're doing relatively well. Now, does everybody have a job who wants a job? No. And that means our work is not done yet. We need to make sure that every Canadian who wants a job gets a job, and gets a job that is adequate with their skills and adequate with their sense of dignity. And we will not stop focusing on that until every Canadian who wants a job has a job. We're focused on jobs, growth, and long-term prosperity as a government. We have a plan, it's working, and we're sticking to it.
You also, I've noticed you enter in some free trade agreements, one with Europe and other nations too, South America. I think Honduras was one nation you've entered into. The question I have to ask is, if you look at Canada, trade between the provinces is a restriction. Well, when are they going to lower that restriction and start having free trade within the provinces, which would generate more income, generate more jobs, generate more taxable assets for the different governments, put more money in the coffer? It would help the nation as a whole. That's the question I have to ask you.
I agree with you 100%, and our government agrees with you 100%. We've done very well on the trade front. We just negotiated the largest, best free trade agreement ever negotiated in the history of the world with the CETA, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement with the European Union. 42 countries involved in that, and it opens up a market of 500 million people to Canadian business, $2.7 trillion in government procurement opportunities. We've negotiated another 6 free trade agreements. So, we've done very well on the free trade front. In terms of negotiating bilateral agreements. We've created tens of thousands of new jobs out of trade means jobs. And it's so important that we as a nation of traders, as a Canadian, as a country that depends on exports and imports, that we engage in free trade. However, you're so right. It's easier now to trade between Canada and the United States, or Canada and Honduras, or Canada, Israel, than it is to trade between Ontario and Saskatchewan, for example. It's a major problem. We're pushing the provincial governments to lower their tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, so that we can encourage more east-west trade as opposed to bilateral trade between country and country. It's so important that we do that. Provinces got to realize that this trade means jobs. And trade is not just what happens between two sovereign countries. Trade is also what happens between two provinces. And they got to lower those trade barriers. We're pushing them to do it. We can't order them to do it as much as we'd like to, but the province has got to undertake that in a serious way and got to start to lower tariff and non-tariff barriers between each other.
And also on your website, there's talk, I'm reading one of the articles on there, talked about fast-tracking these foreign criminals. Before I ask you a question about that, when it comes to war criminals, Operation Paperclip brought known Nazi war criminals here to Canada and the United States. There has been other war criminals coming in. I'm very much for having them sent out of Canada, even if they've been here for decades. They've committed atrocities, they got to go. But when it comes to people that are, refugee from war, refugees or objective, war resistors, there's people there that I support having them stay. With all that in mind, with your fast track of these foreign criminals, what protections do you have in place to make sure that the survivors of a war refugee or even objective war objectors, is having them to be able to stay here, and then basically getting rid of the individuals that we don't want here anymore?
Yeah. Well, that's really two separate issues, and the first one, let's deal with war criminals first. Yeah, there were a lot of war criminals that came here to Canada after the Second World War, and there have been subsequent war criminals that have come from various other atrocities that have been committed around the world. We as a government have been trying to find these people, trying to identify them, and then once we do, we try to get them out of Canada. It's not easy, particularly in the case of Nazi war criminals, for example. A lot of them would be in their mid to late 90s now, if they're still alive. And the laws that have been created in this country over the years and the decades since the Second World War have made it next to impossible to extradite a Nazi war criminal, for example. First of all, the country of origin, or where they came from, needs to ask for that person. We can try them here, but we don't have the laws on the books to really prosecute them here and to put them in jail. So it would take years and years of both trial and appeal before we can even convict somebody of one of those crimes. And that's a real shame, because we really wanted to do that. And that was one of the first things I asked of the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration when I first got to Ottawa. What do we do about these people who are still living in our country? And he told me that it would just be a nightmare trying to prosecute people, strip them of their citizenship. It's a very difficult process. Now, in terms of criminals who have made Canada a haven, what we've done is we have made it easier to send them back to their country of origin. There was one recently, Asa Mohammed, who was convicted of murdering an Israeli citizen, blowing up an El Al plane in the 1970s. We identified him, and we extradited him to Lebanon, where he was from. And he was living in Canada for over 40 years, taking advantage of our very generous social system, raising his kids in a safe environment. And that's unacceptable. A criminal's a criminal, and they need to pay for their crimes. And once they're convicted of it, they need to face the jury. In terms of refugees, we've actually streamlined the process. So we've made it easier for legitimate refugees to claim refugee status here in Canada, and made it more difficult for those who are not legitimate refugees not to remain in Canada. We have a very generous refugee system. We take in more refugees per capita than any other country around the world. Our immigration system is second to none around the world. So in terms of generosity, we're very generous, but in the past we've been sometimes considered to be too generous. And we need to separate those who are legitimate refugees from those who are illegitimate refugees. Legitimate refugees, by all means, need to come to Canada and need to become permanent residents and ultimately citizens, because they have so much to contribute to our country. Those who are not legitimate, who are just trying to take advantage of our social system, of our wonderful country, of our peace-loving nation, should not be here and should be sent back to their country of origin.
Yeah, I think back in the 60s, the population in Canada was something like 15 million. I think you were I was watching a video, and I think you were talking about it. And because of the immigration in Canada, it's actually we've doubled. We're almost 34, 35 million now. So we are very dependent on the immigration coming in, vice the birth rate in Canada is not really going up. With that in mind, the question I have to ask you, all these qualified immigrants are coming here that have credentials, or is the Conservative government going to pass legislation which starts to recognize your credentials, which that way, because there's shortage of doctors in the rural area of Canada, one would think that someone that wants to immigrate to Canada that's qualified as a doctor, say, okay, you can serve in 5 to 10 years in a rural area, and then basically you're allowed after that you're allowed to practice anywhere. Wouldn't the Conservative government think of something like that?
That's a $64,000 question. Yes, and actually we have. And Canada welcomes 250,000 new immigrants every year. In fact, during the recession, our Prime Minister made the decision, Prime Minister Harper, not to lower immigration levels. When every other country around the world, because of the downturn in their economies, were lowering immigration, Canada maintained it at 250,000 people, the only G7 country to do that. We right now have a skilled labor shortage in our country. We need to find people around the world who can fill the jobs that we need going forward in this country. There are jobs out west that don't have enough people to fill them because we don't have the skills in our country. So we need to seek those people around the world. Our immigration system is being revised to be able to do that. So if you have a specific skill that you can fill a job here in Canada that Canadian cannot, then we need you. And we're actively out there seeking you. Now, you talk about professional certification and doctors and engineers and dentists coming to Canada and not being able to practice their trade. We have, as a government, now a lot of this has to do with provincial jurisdiction, provincial laws, and also provincial regulatory bodies for these various professions. What we have done as a federal government, what is within our area of authority, is to budget enough money so people can actually upgrade their skill level to bring it up to Canadian standards. Now, a lot of the people exceed Canadian standards, but we don't know that. And so we need to find this out. So we've committed the money to help retrain people, to help get people qualified here in Canada, but it's up to the provincial government to actually qualify them. And so we need to ask that question of the provinces. And I don't mean to be putting you off on this, but we as a government recognize that we need these people, and we have these shortages of jobs that must be filled. The province and the provincial regulatory bodies that administer these regulations for these various professions also need to realize that our country needs these people. And so the quicker that they can get with the program, the better this country will be, and the better off everybody else will be.
And the final question I have to ask you, looking back over the time you've actually been in Parliament, you're basically the founder of the Economic Club, and even what your father was teaching you, what is one thing that really sticks out in mind, something you want to share with people that might help inspire someone else that's going through something in their life?
I'm glad you asked that question because, my goodness, I've grown up in this community my entire life, and I thought I knew it well. And I have found out in the last 2.5 years I've been a member of Parliament, there is so much that I didn't know about my own community, and shame on me for not knowing it. The amount of need in our community, the amount of people who are the real heroes, who are doing so much wonderful work, not because they're looking for headlines or glory. They're doing it because they're members of the community, and they're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Last summer, for just one example, and there's many, but I'll give you one example. We went to visit a camp in the Shepherd and Kiel area of the riding. These were young black kids, 5 years old to about 10 years old. A teacher, using his own money, rented out a school to take in these kids. They were, single parent homes. Mom would go off to work, drop the kid off during the day. And you remember how hot it was last summer, some 40-degree days, stifling hot. And these kids would sit in the school. They had no toys. They had no coloring things to play with. They were eating Kraft dinner every day eating Kraft dinner for lunch. And no pool to go swimming at. In fact, there was one time they got access to a pool and in that area, and somebody stole all their clothes. When they came up from swimming, they didn't have any clothes. We went there, and, it was very emotional. I mean, after we got the tour and talked to the people and talked to the kids, we went out in the car, and my assistant and I, we had to cry because it was so sad. And we've seen this time and time and time again. So what we do is we rallied businesses here in the riding of York Centre, grocery stores, various companies, to help with people in the community. So what we did in this instance was, it wasn't right these kids had to eat Kraft dinner every day. It wasn't right that they didn't have a pool to swim in. It wasn't right that they didn't have any toys to play with. These are young kids. They got to be kids. So we got grocery stores that donate fruits and vegetables and and food for lunch and for breakfast, and treats for during the day. We got some stores to give money for toys. We got some others to another organization to pay for access to a swimming pool over in the Don Mills area, a really nice swimming pool, and the kids really enjoyed it. So we made all these arrangements for this group. And we've done this in various groups and organizations. But the thing is, the best part of this is when you see the smile on the kids' faces, and you know that, listen, these kids are smart, they're talented, and if we don't help them, give them the same opportunity that everyone else has in this country, yeah, they're going to lose, but more importantly, our whole society is going to lose. These are some doctors, some lawyers, who, if we don't give them the tools to succeed, they're not going to succeed. And we need to make sure they have those tools and resources at their disposal. And it's really the responsibility of those of us who can make a difference, to make a difference. And these other people out there who are doing it on their own resources, my goodness, we just marvel at what they do. And they're not doing it because they want the headlines. They're doing it because they're members of the community, and it's a responsibility they feel. And so we got to give them all the credit. They're the real heroes out there. You know, we're just facilitators who kind of make things happen. But, you know, it's sad to see, but we really got to make a difference. And that's what we're working hard at most of the time, most of the day, reaching out there. And we're not waiting for people come to us. We go out there and seek it because we know people need our help. And that's what we do. And that's what we do all the time. And it doesn't matter, you know, Christmas time is not a time for us to take off, because Christmas time is a time when there's most need. And so we're out there constantly trying to find where we can help, because not only a member of Parliament, and yeah, I am, but I'm also a member of this community, and we can't let our fellow neighbors down.
That's so true. Well, thank you so much for your time there, Mark.
Thank you very much, Reg.